American History, Lesson 16. In this lesson we will describe the range and variety of specialized roles performed by enslaved people, explain how slave labor systems affected the formation of African American musical and linguistic practices, and evaluate the economic effects of enslaved people's labor, within and outside of African American communities. Enslaved people of all ages and genders performed a wide variety of domestic, agricultural, and skilled labor in both urban and rural locales. In some areas, there were distinct roles separating domestic and agricultural laborers, although enslaved people could be reallocated to another type of labor according to the preferences of their enslaver. It is a little-known fact that some enslaved people were bound to institutions such as churches, factories, and colleges rather than to an individual person. The Catholic Church used slave labor and sales to build its institutions and to expand. For example, in 1838 the Jesuits sold 272 enslaved people to save Georgetown University from bankruptcy. In 2022, the Jesuits and more than 500 Georgetown alumni pledged $27 million to establish the Descendants Truth Amp, Reconciliation Trust. The fund is committed to spending $400,000 per year to provide scholarships for the descendants of slaves and support for elderly descendants of slaves. Additionally, the fund will be used to support anti-racism advocacy programs, free legal services, educational programming for children, and service projects that will engage young adults in helping in their own communities. Many enslaved Africans brought skills to the Americas, including blacksmithing, basket weaving, and the cultivation of rice and indigo. Enslavers exploited these valuable skills, as well as the specializations many African Americans developed as painters, carpenters, tailors, musicians, and healers. African Americans used these skills not only to benefit the slave owners, but also to survive, create culture, and build community with each other. Enslaved agricultural laborers often worked in a gang system or a task system. In the gang system, enslaved laborers worked in groups from dawn to sundown, under the watch and discipline of an overseer, as they cultivated crops like cotton, sugar, and tobacco. Enslaved people working in gangs created work songs, in English, with syncopated rhythms, to keep the pace of work. After the Civil War, the gang system of slavery was replaced by the prison chain gang. Freed slaves who were now homeless after having been emancipated by their former owners were often arrested for vagrancy and sentenced to a chain gang as punishment, thus providing Southern states with cheap labor to do the work of rebuilding. Chain gangs continued to exist in many places until their elimination in 1955. In the task system, enslaved people worked individually until they met a daily quota, generally with less supervision. The task system was used for the cultivation of crops like rice and indigo. With less oversight, some enslaved people maintained linguistic practices, such as the Gullah Creole language that developed in the Carolina Low Country. The task system was less brutal than the gang system because once the daily quota was met, the enslaved person could spend the rest of the day as they wished. After the Civil War, freemen were able to negotiate labor contracts with their former owners, which extended the concept of task labor. Slavery fostered economic interdependence between the North and South. Cities that did not play a major role in the African slave trade nonetheless benefited from the economy created by slavery. The South produced large quantities of cotton, primarily through slave labor, which was then bought by northern textile mills to manufacture into cloth, creating a vital trade relationship where the North relied on the South's cotton production fueled by slavery for its industrial growth. Although we generally think of the Civil War being a conflict between the Southern slaveholding states and the Northern free states, the interdependence of the North and South economically also led to conflicts within the Northern states. One example of this is Lowell, Massachusetts. Lowell was undoubtedly a center of anti-slavery activism. The people signed petitions and donated money to fund anti-slavery court cases. They formed societies, published abolitionist newspapers, and invited abolitionist speakers such as Frederick Douglass, Henry David Thoreau, and Ralph Waldo Emerson to speak. They also helped fugitive slaves escape to freedom. However, Lowell's textile-based economy was wholly dependent on slave-harvested cotton. This led to conflicts between the abolitionists and the textile mill owners. There is no doubt that enslaved people and their labor were foundational to the American economy, and although slavery ended more than 160 years ago, the descendants of enslaved people continue to be alienated from the wealth that their ancestors both embodied and produced. The legacy of slavery has deeply entrenched wealth disparities along America's racial lines. Enslaved African Americans had no wages or savings to pass down to their descendants, making it difficult for succeeding generations to purchase property and therefore build generational wealth. The idea of reparations for the descendants of enslaved people of African descent remains controversial. However, the continuing wealth gap between white and non-white American citizens remains clear and unrefuted. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, and share it on social media. You can also subscribe to the channel at Quietly Radical on YouTube to be notified whenever new videos are released. Please join us next time when we'll discuss slavery and American law, including slave codes and landmark cases.